Our session leader is Chris Stelzer, Senior Technical Specialist at Microsoft. And Chris is our old friend, and he did a couple of sessions and always welcomed by our audience. Chris is a hands-on technical leader in cybersecurity with over 12 years of experience. And he is passionate about bringing ideas and visions to life through technology. And Chris is a creative thinker and a subject matter expert across Microsoft security solution portfolio. And as you can see, Chris will talk about a very hot, extremely hot topic today, unleashing the power of ChatGPT or ChatGPT-3 in security operations. All right, so without further ado, I will pass the control to Chris. Chris, you take over from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here with everybody. So I want to preface it by saying, while ChatGPT is great, it's some amazing buzz in the media around what its capabilities are. I think millions and millions of people have tried it. Today, in order to really interact with and develop our own applications, we're somewhat limited because ChatGPT doesn't have an API, quote, yet. It's coming, right? So today, what do we have in order to integrate very similar technology? We have what's called GPT-3, which is actually just the previous iteration of ChatGPT. So think of ChatGPT as like what we call GPT 3.5, a custom version of the previous GPT-3 model that's designed for more of a chatbot interface. So the first thing I always get asked is we're going to be playing with both ChatGPT and GPT-3 in the demos. I've only got 2 slides, and the entire rest of the session is going to be a live demo. So from the first thing I generally get asked is, what's the difference? And we can actually just ask ChatGPT, what is the difference? And if you actually hop in ChatGPT and say, hey, what's the difference between yourself and GPT-3? It's going to indicate that they're both large language models trained by OpenAI. They have some key differences. GPT-3, or generative pre-trained transformer 3, is the 3rd generation of OpenAI's GPT language model, and it's one of the most powerful language models currently available. ChatGPT, on the other hand, is really a variant of the GPT-3 model specifically designed for chatbot applications. It's been charged on large data sets of conversational text, so it's able to generate responses that are far more appropriate in a chatbot context. So they're very, very similar in the way they interact. So when I talk about automation and SOAR capabilities, we're going to be using the GPT-3 API because that's what's currently available. But very soon in the future, when the new Bing search APIs are out with ChatGPT, or when general ChatGPT APIs are available with OpenAI, we can very easily adapt to using these different APIs. But GPT-3 has some very, very powerful features. So the way we're going to talk about this is from a security operations lens. And I shared this example in my previous cyber tech and risk session around SOAR. When we talk about what are some cool examples of SOAR and how security operations are generally leveraging SOAR capabilities. And I think I shared in the last example a lot around triage. We're collecting data about the incident that's going on. We're collecting information. We're correlating that data, and we're gathering as much evidence as we can during that triage process. We're then sort of moving into the enrichment phase and using SOAR to help enrich the entities, the IP addresses, the file hashes, the users. What do we know about these things in relation to the security operations process? And if you haven't seen my previous session around using Sentinel and our cool new what's called the Sentinel Triage Assistant module, go back and watch that, because I'm actually going to build upon a lot of the stuff I talked about in the previous session. So if we're doing a lot of really cool stuff around SOAR to help triage and help the enrichment phases, the last phase that we really have to deal with in terms of security operation is really the response phase. Like, how do we, after we've gathered all of this really critical and relative information, how do we respond? And one of the ways that I think these really cool natural language models like GPT-3 and ChatGPT can come in handy is helping us produce response plans, taking all this great evidence that we know, right? What is the incident we're dealing with? What's the title, the description, the MITRE techniques, the IP addresses, the hosts, the file hashes, sending that into a natural language model and asking it to produce a response plan. Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of privacy implications and things like that. Obviously, take this into account. You shouldn't be submitting, private content considered PII to these open language models. Now, once Azure supports OpenAI and some of the technologies within it, we can do this in a little more secure fashion. So that's what we're going to showcase today, is the ability to basically take all of the data that we've done in previous sessions around incident correlation, incident enrichment, and pass that data into our GPT-3 language model and allow it to basically produce us a response plan. Take that information that GPT-3 responds with and send it into Microsoft Sentinel to basically integrate it into the security platform. And I think what's interesting about this particular example is we're already seeing organizations do this. This is an exact example that Orca launched last week. I think it was about a week or two ago. I saw this hit the media, where Orca's cloud security platform has actually done this. Their goal is to actually take GPT-3, and if you look specifically at what they've done, they've adopted the GPT-3 DaVinci 03 series API, which is exactly what we're going to do in today's session, to generate contextual remediation plans for security alerts. So this is exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to take information in security alerts, we're going to feed it into the GPT-3 API, and we're going to generate detailed explanations of how to remediate these issues using a whole host of examples. So this is already happening in the media. I don't know exactly what we at Microsoft are going to do with this technology from a security operations lens, but I'm very, very excited to see the capabilities in the future of integrating these natural language models into things like Sentinel, Microsoft Defender, and all the other technologies that we have. So if we think about an incident in Sentinel in general, let's just pull up an example of an incident within my current environment. And this is an example that's basically indicating, hey, there is a threat intelligence match, meaning somebody has logged in, there is sign-in log data in which an IP address has a matching threat intelligence indicator. Now, as a normal security analyst who is maybe junior, maybe tier 1, they might not have any knowledge as to how they should interact with this incident. What are general best practice steps to integrate and respond to this particular incident? So what we can basically do is, if we just take this as an example and say, okay, what if we took the title, the description, the username, the IP address, anything else that we have, and just ask ChatGPT how it would respond to an incident in question. And you can basically just do this in your own. This is exactly how a lot of organizations kind of started down this track, is hop in ChatGPT and frame the question. As a security operations analyst, give me step-by-step instructions on how an analyst would respond to an incident using Sentinel with the following title and description and the related account and the related IP. So essentially, we're framing in a proof of concept an ask to this model by passing it information from Sentinel. Now, this is just an ad hoc example before we get into actually automating this. And you can see in here, it's actually really cool. It's actually very, very creative in its response, indicating that, sign into Sentinel, bring the alert up, review the relevant details, confirm the IP address, check the sign-in logs data for matches, if a match is found, so on and so forth. If you think this is a threat, you should probably think about blocking the IP address, disabling the account. Lots of interesting recommendations in here. And what I really, really like about this is, while we have fed this particular model the product of Microsoft Sentinel, this is not a Sentinel-specific ask. If we take another example of bringing up an alternate example here, where it's just a different kind of an incident. Now, say for an example that this particular host that is involved with this incident is indeed compromised. As a security analyst, I might have specific instructions depending on the technology I'm using. Like, say, we've determined that this host is indeed compromised. The next step would be to indicate that we should be isolating this host, right? We should, ensure that whatever threat is on this host can't spread throughout our network. So we can also ask these natural language models for specific technology-based instructions. So if I knew I needed to isolate this host, I could ask it a specific example of, how to isolate that particular host using a piece of technology. Give me step-by-step instructions for isolating this machine using Defender for Endpoint. Include links to documentation. Now, keep in mind, with the current state of these models, is they're trained on data that is slightly old. So when we get into very complex scenarios of asking it to produce, link documentation and things like that, in its current state, these AIs are not perfect because they don't have search capabilities. They don't have internet access to actually crawl through real-time documentation. However, we know this is changing very quickly. Very shortly, when the new Bing gets released to everybody and the APIs are there, these type of asks can be a lot more relative. The ability to actually, crawl real-time documentation for actual steps is really cool. So we're going to be using both of these examples, both generic response plans to the overall incident and specific actions that we may want to document. And you can see specifically in here, the instructions are actually really great. I mean, head to the security portal, bring the device up. Once you bring the device up, click the actions button and choose isolate. But again, what I really, really like about this is technology changes a lot in customers' environments. Today, you might be using Tenable or Nessus. Tomorrow, you might be using Defender, which means it's very, very easy for me to just contextually change the technology and have the response plan dynamically adapted. So as an example, give me step-by-step instructions for isolating this host using CrowdStrike. And there we go. There's an entirely different response plan listed here based on a simple change of the technology. So I think this is going to be really revolutionize the ability to produce concrete step-by-step instructions based on the technology that's being used. So how do we actually take this and put it into Sentinel? The first thing we're basically going to do is think about creating what's called a logic app to do this. And when I think about creating and designing logic apps to automate SOAR operations, the first thing you want to think of is making them very, very modular. We want to be able to reuse these bits of code wherever we can. So never create monolithic logic apps that are their own entities. We want to make them as modular as possible. So in the example that I shared, right, we basically know what needs to take place. We know we need to ask the language model how to respond to an incident. And if we think about what we originally asked it, we asked it for the title, the description, the hosts, and the IP addresses. We can kind of think of these as like parameters. So essentially, we want to create an open logic app that accepts a set of parameters. And the best way to do this is through what we call an HTTP request. So this is the most common way to create modular logic apps, is starting with a post request, meaning that anytime anybody calls this URL with a post request, meaning an API call using, and we can call these from other logic apps, which we'll show you in a minute. So basically, I need to formulate a list of parameters, and this is what we refer to as the JSON schema or the body schema. So basically, I know what my schema is based on those previous examples, and you can make changes to this very, very easily. So I'm going to feed this particular logic app a list of accounts, a list of hosts, a list of IP addresses, the incident title, the incident description, and the MITRE techniques. I'm going to feed it all that information and then do something with it. So because this is very, very modular, we can basically just reuse these bits of code wherever we want. So when you first define this schema, what happens is all of these parameters inside the schema now become parameters throughout the rest of the logic app that I can use. And really where the magic happens is really this activity in the logic app called GPT-3. And this is just built-in logic app connector that you can use in your environment. But in order to start using this, we need an API key. We have to sign up with OpenAI, generate an API key, and use that throughout the environment. So that's very, very easy to do. You can hop in your OpenAPI account. Once you're in your OpenAPI account, you can basically generate an API key. This API key is attributed to you, your organization, and there is cost attributed with it. So it's important to understand that, when you do sign up, they actually give you a free credit. I think it's like $20 of free credit to play around with this. But every sort of call to this API has a cost attributed with it. It is very, very low cost. Like we're talking pennies to actually ask the AI to generate a response plan based on the contextual data. So you've got to go in, generate an API key that you're going to basically use within this logic app. So I've already inputted my API key here, but this sort of defines, what you're going to be doing. So I'm basically taking the exact prompt that I fed ChatGPT and just inserting those parameters initially created in the first step. So the first step was that web API call with my schema, and I'm feeding it the incident title, the incident description, the accounts, the IPs, and the hosts. Now, a lot of these other parameters you can play with, and I would encourage you to think about playing with this temperature parameter the most. This temperature parameter is really, really cool, and it basically tells OpenAI how random to generate responses. So playing with this temperature parameter is really, really critical. So it's really a scale between 0 and 1. With a temperature of 0, GPT-3 will give you the highest probable response each time, meaning if you feed it one sentence and it produces a response, you're guaranteed to get that same response if you give it the same prompt. You know, when you approach 1 on a scale of 0 to 1, the randomness of the output is increased, meaning if we feed it the same alert, the same title, the same description, we're going to get a different response from the AI every time. So while in playing and kind of POCing, it's really interesting to sort of tweak this temperature parameter to see how the AI responds based on these things. What I also think is really, really cool is you can fine tune these APIs yourself. So while without any fine tuning, it's just going to generate a response based on the data that it knows, you absolutely can fine tune this yourself. It's very, very cool. You can prepare training data for GPT-3. So you can basically produce a simple CSV file that has your prompt and what you want your completion to be, and it will basically train the AI to respond more appropriately based on your process. And I think this is really interesting from a security operations lens, because you could say, you know, dump the most 100 common alerts in your environment and have an actual human go through and produce a response plan based on your organizational requirements. Because while the AI, it's great in a POC scenario, you may want to help it train to produce a lot more relative documentation in your environment. So this is really cool, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this, the ability to sort of train these AIs in specific tasks and specific responses. And I'm quite certain that's an example what Orca would have done in their implementation of GPT-3 in their own cloud security platform. They know what types of alerts are generated. They know generally how the AI should respond. So they've more than likely fine-tuned that particular example. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to do any fine-tuning at all. I didn't do any fine-tuning in my environment. I simply said, you know, generate this, you know, do this, and then send the output. That's all this logic app is doing, is taking some parameters, calling the API, and then producing an output. Now, in a nutshell, this isn't doing anything right now. We need to integrate it with Sentinel incidents for it to actually do some cool stuff. So the first thing you want to do is really test this, and Postman becomes your friend when testing these types of things. So you can very, very easily hop into your Logic app, copy this URL, take it into Postman. And if you've never played with Postman, it's just a tool for interacting with APIs. Just toss your URL in there. Remember, the body that we formulated in the schema at the very top of the Logic app, that's all we're doing here. Pass it that information in a quick test. So you can basically very quickly test your Logic app by sending it some information. It's going to send it to the Logic app. It's going to run through the GPT API, and it's going to produce output. And we want to make sure our Logic app is working before we start integrating it into Sentinel as an example. So this is basically generating a response plan. And if we sort of minimize this screen, we can see the Logic app, you know, within our environment is actually running. You can see it's actually running here, gathering the response plan. Once the response is basically complete, we have our response plan. As soon as the security operation, they should investigate the alert, they should do this, they should do that, look for unusual login attempts. So my response plan was generated based on the content. So I know this Logic app is working really, really well. So now that I have a Logic app that I can basically just interact with, you know, I can start integrating this into Sentinel. And I thought to myself, you know, this one scenario of feeding it incident information is great, but I love the ChatGPT example of the ability to, like, hey, I'm having a problem, you know, I don't know what this means, and I want to be able to just ad hoc ask it anything. So I thought to myself, okay, so this is great for a general response plan for an incident. I want a second Logic app to basically just freeform ask it a question. And we can actually integrate this with Teams in a really cool scenario. So I did the same thing, just basically duplicated that Logic app. And the only parameter in this Logic app is question and max tokens. Max tokens is how verbose do you want the output of the API. So this can kind of be filtered. And that's all I'm basically doing in this scenario. So one Logic app that allows me to ask it an open-ended question, another that accepts very concrete parameters from an incident. So in this case, you know, I can just run this, ask it a simple question, and it's going to respond with output. So I've kind of got two examples of how I can use these logic apps, and we're going to integrate them into Sentinel now. So you can see this one's running just with a free-form answer, and there we go. Review the authentication methods for the privileged account, compare them, so on and so forth. So really, really cool around these two examples. So I know they're working, and now I have the capability to sort of integrate them into Sentinel. So how are we going to integrate these into Sentinel? Well, in general, we kind of want these to run every time a new incident is created. So I like to think in them as like, we'll integrate them into our triage process. And if you haven't viewed my prior session on using our Sentinel Triage Assistant module, go back and watch that because it'll make a lot more sense. So I'm basically building upon a lot of the work that I talked about before. So I have a triage playbook that basically says, anytime a Sentinel incident is created, I want you to run this playbook. And I basically just added our GPT-3 in a bunch of different spots within our triage playbook, because we've kind of got two ways that we can do this. I obviously want generalized response plan based on the information in the incident, but during our triage process, we actually surface a lot of evidence. Like, as an example, if I have an incident pertaining to a certain user, as part of our triage process, we're actually going to discover the computers that this person uses. Right? So there's all kinds of different modules that are not related to GPT that are actually discovering the computers that this person uses on a normal basis. And it's actually returning if those computers are vulnerable. It's actually also doing things like finding out if this person's registered for MFA. And if they're not, it will tell us that. So while on one hand, I want a tactical plan based on the incident, I may also want to feed some of this triage data. If I know this person's not registered for MFA, generally I would want a task to basically make sure MFA is turned on for this user. If this person's using a computer that is highly vulnerable, right, it's got a ton of vulnerabilities on it, I might want a very tactical response plan to investigate the vulnerabilities on that person's computer. So we're actually going to do both examples in this particular scenario. So back on my triage logic app, I have a lot of examples where I'm looking at every account associated with the incident, every IP address, and those types of things. And I've actually added my GPT-3 task depending on the data that's surfaced from a triage perspective. So in this particular case, it's actually saying every computer the person has used in the last 30 days, and if that person's computer is highly vulnerable. So this is actually tailoring and saying, like, if you discover a person's computer is highly vulnerable, I want you to ask GPT-3 how to give step-by-step instructions for utilizing Microsoft 365 Defender to view the current vulnerabilities of the device in question. And again, this is really cool because you don't have to be using Defender for Endpoint. You could be using CrowdStrike or Tenable or Nessus. A simple change to the name of the technology in this case will dynamically adapt the instructions based on the task that you're going through. So I do this a lot throughout my environment. We can actually take advantage of our new task feature in Sentinel. So what's going to happen is it's going to generate me a general response plan for the incident. And then as it discovers these different things in the environment, user doesn't have MFA, computer is vulnerable, we know matching threat intelligence, it's going to tactically add specific tasks to the incident in Sentinel. So it's going to ask for step-by-step instructions on how to do this thing, and then it's going to add a task with the response directly into Sentinel. So I'm actually doing that for every computer that is highly vulnerable, for every IP address that matches threat intelligence. So if the IP address on the incident has a match with our threat intelligence, there's generally a follow-up task. And as well, if the user itself is not registered for MFA. So there's kind of three very tactical things that we're gathering in our triage process that have very concrete instructions. Make sure they're registered for MFA, review the vulnerabilities on the device, and check for matching threat intelligence data. So I'm doing very tactical tasks, and at the end of the incident, I'm basically generating a general response plan. And here is where I'm basically executing my generalized response plan by passing it the accounts, the hosts, the descriptions, the title, the IP addresses, and the MITRE techniques. So I'm basically using both of those logic app examples. And again, what I'm doing here is just I'm calling a logic app from a different logic app. And this is why it's critical to kind of make your logic apps as modular as possible. So anytime I want to generate a response plan, I pass it that information and away I go. So then I'm going to parse that information. I'm going to add it to the incident in question. So if we think about kind of how this works and how this operates inside the environment, I can close my example logic app down and I can bring up, that exact example that I had previously. So we have a threat intelligence match to an IP address in our sign-in logs. So I can actually click the activity log button and you'll actually see that out of the box, as this incident was created, GPT-3 has already produced a response plan based on the title, the description, the IP address, and the username associated with this incident. So it's actually telling me first that, the security operations analyst should assess the alert and identify relevant information. The analyst should review the sign-in logs from the associated IP address. It's really cool. It's actually, taken that IP address that I fed it and put it into the step-by-step instructions. Once the operations analyst has identified a match, they should take appropriate action, contain the threat, or disable the associated account. Now, I think this is an amazing first step. In the future, maybe it can actually, call logic apps for me. Maybe it can generate my own logic apps. Really, really cool example of this generalized response plan. But remember, as a result of my triage process, I have gathered a lot of additional evidence. And I covered this in our last phase. Like if you look down at all the triage data has been analyzed. So, as a result of triage, I've actually analyzed that, this person uses these 5 computers and one of those computers has a lot of vulnerabilities on it. And because of that, I've actually asked GPT-3 to generate me a specific task to review those vulnerabilities. And you can actually see that specifically on this task screen. So I now click our new tasks interface within Sentinel, I can actually see that generalized response plan as a task, but specifically the exact host that was related to this user that is considered vulnerable with exact instructions on how to view those vulnerabilities in a different tool, right? Search for this device, load the Defender portal, bring the vulnerabilities up, review them, and take action and fix them as required. So it's very interesting that, we've generated an overall response plan, but we've also gotten very tactical about, integrating our triage evidence into this response process. You can actually see also this IP address right here, 88.208, is a known threat intelligence indicator. So here it's actually giving me specific instructions for going into Sentinel, bringing up our threat intelligence section, and reviewing all the information pertaining to threat intelligence for that particular IP address. And if I were to sort of follow those instructions, I can see indeed that threat intelligence indicators are related to that user. I can bring those events up and I can see indeed we have logons for this IP taking place from the UK that is indeed a known Tor exit node. So really cool and interesting examples of sort of integrating that data into the environment. I'll bring up some other examples to show you in the environment. An example of security event logs cleared from a host. I bring this incident up, let's see what, GPT-3 has to tell me about this particular incident. And indeed, there's a response plan here, right? First, analyze the alert, and the type, consider the title, create a timeline, check for any additional indicators of compromise, bring up that particular host in question. If I look at the tasks attributed with this particular example, I have my generalized response plan and I have a notion that, this host is considered highly vulnerable within this particular incident, and step-by-step instructions to look at the vulnerabilities of that host using the different tools and technologies that are available out there. So, really cool example, but I got thinking, this is great, but what if I need to just ask you to contextual question? Like as an example, this is an incident that I'll look at, this sort of new user agent string. So this basically indicates that, this particular user is using a new browser or a new client that hasn't been seen in the previous 2 weeks. So this is something that I should be concerned about. And if I look at the activity log, GPT-3 has given me a good example of how I should sort of investigate this incident. As I'm sort of investigating this incident and pulling up the events associated with this particular incident, I can see here that there's that what the specific user agent is that was found in this particular scenario. And I can see here it's, but as an analyst or a junior analyst, I don't really know what this means. Like, what the heck does this user agent string actually mean in this particular scenario? So there may be cases where I want kind of an ad hoc ask. I want to ask it, what the heck does this mean? And have it contextually provide that evidence. And remember, I created that freeform logic app to ask it some input. Well, we can actually have this integrated with Teams, really, really cool. And I think we're going to see this really come in future iterations of having almost like a virtual sidekick throughout the incident investigation experience. Something I can, ask questions to. It can give me insights. I can continually feed it what I know. And I think that's what ChatGPT is really good at, is learning from the context of the conversation. Hey, I have these usernames, these IP addresses. I've done this. What do you think I should do next? These type of contextual conversations could be really powerful to help security operations. So I actually have this integrated with Teams. And I showed this example in the previous one where, anytime a new incident is created, it tells me the title and the description directly within Teams. But within Teams, it actually gives me this sort of open-ended response section. And, historically, I would use this to close the incident or change the severity if I needed to directly within Teams. But what I actually did was just add a GPT SOS option. So this is really cool because now I'm contextually on this incident 2546, and I want to ask GPT-3 specifically what the heck this user string is. So I could basically say, can you explain this user agent string, ? And basically just click the GPT SOS button. So what's going to happen now is it's going to call that logic app. It's going to send that information. It's going to answer that information with exactly what it responds with, and actually have the response put directly on the incident in question. So I think this is really cool because as your analysts are interacting with this AI, we can actually have that contextual evidence appended to the incident. So we know what was asked, we know the response, and away we go. So here, it basically tells me the analyst asked, can you explain what this user agent string is? This user agent string belongs to a computer running Windows 10, which has the Teams application version. The Teams is running on top of the Chrome web browser, which is running on the Electron framework version 885 and is using Apple WebKit and Safari Web Engine. So it's given me a much better explanation of what the heck this user agent string is than just this contextual evidence. But what I can actually do now is open that incident. And when I open that incident and bring up the activity log, what I actually asked GPT-3 in this particular example is actually appended directly to the incident in question. So it's actually that ask and response is directly integrated into the incident. The analyst asked GPT-3, can you explain this user agent string? Yes, and there's our response. So it's an interesting example of sort of integrating both, the title, the description, and all of the tactical pieces of evidence we have, but also the free form, human element of asking these AIs for certain pieces of information and allowing them to sort of respond appropriately. So lots of really cool examples we covered here. I know it's a whirlwind of information. We're going to kind of open it up for questions and allow people to ask, but I really think there's some really, really cool things in here, whether it be leveraging these AIs through security operations, training them to better understand incident response processes. Like, this is V1 of what we're dealing with here. Once we get search capabilities and customizations, I think this is really going to open a whole bunch of information to a large number of people outside there. So we basically covered in the session, how to triage incidents by gathering information, enrich them with really cool examples like our Sentinel Stat module, and then taking that data and feeding it into a GPT-3 natural language model and outputting that data into Microsoft Sentinel to integrate into that response process. So we'll just kind of open it up to the floor, see if there's anybody out there who has any questions or who wants to see something or is curious about something. I'm an open book for sure. Feel free to come off mute or drop something in the chat if you guys want to ask any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. This is a really eye-opening demonstration. And as Chris mentioned, that this is actually built on his previous demonstration on the SOAR capability on the Microsoft Sentinel and the SOAR playbook, like those the great demo he did before at Cyber Tech Risk event. So if you missed that part, we have the record for that session. You can visit the Cyber Tech and Risk YouTube channel to find out that demo. And today, basically, Chris, take one step further to integrate ChatGPT. I know there's tons of things we can do. This is really the starting point to show you the power of ChatGPT or some potential use cases. So we will, for the rest, we have about 20 minutes for this interactive session. So the rest session really is, I will leave to you. And so you can ask some questions, take this chance. We have more than 50 people online right now.
Awesome.
So I will be the facilitator. If we have a lot of people ask questions, I will probably kind of like ask you to take it in turn. So if you have any question for Chris, feel free to unmute. If there are too many people, I will just ask you one by one, and go ahead to ask. Or another way is you want to type your question in the chat. If you cannot talk, that's also very okay to do it. So let's do it. So who wants to ask the chat, Chris, the first question?
Come on, we gotta have some questions, comments.
Yeah. In fact, if people are kind of trying to get to the microphone or those things, I will take this chance to ask the first question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question will be really this: ChatGPT is amazing, right? So people are playing that these days. We do see a lot of posts, may not be on the security side, maybe on all kind of question or kind of ask you to write or ask ChatGPT to write something or report or analysis. We do observe, quite many people observe ChatGPT may make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it doesn't mean ChatGPT, the answer from ChatGPT will be the 100% right. Oftentimes, they maybe have like maybe 90% right, but 10% is questionable. So so my question is, when you apply ChatGPT in the especially security operation case, how do you QA the result?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think you're right. Ample testing is key, right? These are, especially when you're playing with the public open AIs that are out there, you know, I think you need to experiment with this in your own environment. I think once, you know, GPT-3 and ChatGPT comes to Azure OpenAI more effectively, the ability for you to develop your own solutions internally within the Azure environment will be key as well. And also the ability to fine tune, right? As I described earlier, like, you know, GPT-3 is very powerful because we can train it with our own information. So if you know it's generating a response that is not ideal, it's very, very easy to feed it additional training data. And you know, they provide step-by-step instructions of just taking a CSV file with a prompt and a completion and sending that to basically more easily refine the data that returns. So I think, you know, training it with your own information and your own data, as well as, you know, doing ample testing and evaluation. You know, I know, for example, like Bing Search API, there's a lot of comments about, you know, the things being incorrect. This is why we test. This is why we have an initial private preview of some of the Bing Search capabilities, so we can kind of fight through this. And, you know, I think, you know, if you look at the Orca article, and I'll drop it in here specifically around this, they say the benefits far outweigh the risks. And it's clear that there is a massive benefit here, but you're right. There could be a potential risk with surfacing potentially incorrect data. But I think, the value that it provides really far outweighs some of the potential risks, right? We're not asking it to just make a decision on, disabling a user account or deleting an IP address or something like that, right? We're really just, always have that human element integrated. Once they get better, I have no doubt, and we're working on lots of things internally inside of Microsoft, things like automated attack disruption, where these machine learning and AI algorithms can actually take action on behalf of you, so you don't have to. But it takes time for us to really determine with 100% certainty that this is the actual response we need out of the environment.
Perfect. Thank you
Yeah,
very much. And I do see a couple of people raise their hands.
great. Yeah.
So, Ranjan,
Yeah.
so go ahead
Yeah.
if you want to
Hi,
ask a
Brian.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris. Thanks a lot for all the information. It's really helpful. Just one quick question I had. Like, how about making some important decisions, based on some of the intel that we get? Say, for example, blocking network from a particular country.
Mm-hmm.
So can this generate some stats on the fly? Like, for example, how many network or subnet would be impacted? How many computers will be affected? How many servers will be affected by a tough decision? Like, I know, like you showed some of the
Yeah.
things. Well, couple of computers, that should be fine, but taking a bigger decision, how helpful could it be, or something is there in the pipeline in future?
Yeah, I mean, I think until, it's familiar with our own data, our own information, and then that begs the question of, from a privacy perspective, if we're feeding it everything that it knows, how do we deal with that? I think, once we can train these models better on our own sets of data, once they have internet search capabilities to more effectively produce responses that are real. Like, as an example, like I think I have a lot of coworkers playing around with it, writing advanced hunting queries. Like, tell me how many computers have this, IP address within the subnet range, or those types of things. Like, actually having it produce queries that can analyze your data. I think that's kind of the next logical step in producing content that is very relative to your output. But the issue today is obviously, when we think about generating those types of queries and hunting commands, our schemas change regularly. The methods, the parameters, the table names, like, everybody's data is very unique. So until it's able to, dynamically search the different content that's out there on the internet to really get the structure and the schemas correct, I think we're going to fall short in some of that environment. But it's improving very, very quickly. And I think once it has that information, once it's more familiar with the data in our own environment, I think it would be more than capable of surfacing a lot of this relative evidence, for sure.
All right. Excellent.
Thanks, Chris.
Krista, right? So I saw your hand, Risa. Go ahead to ask questions.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, Chris. Yeah, quick question. Great demo, by the way. So while we're ingesting all of this information into the ChatGPT to help us out to get a response and create the playbooks and so forth, fantastic. But how is this telemetry secured, and where's the data lake, and how do we go about that part?
Yeah, and that's why I explain, like, this is a proof of concept. I would never recommend somebody use an open API, and a lot of the information that you feed it, you're right, it's not on your own island, it's not isolated. I think this is where we're going to see advancements in Azure OpenAI. So once these models come to Azure OpenAI, and today, in order for you to gain access to it within Azure OpenAI, you have to actually apply. It's not open to the public yet. So there's a form you can fill out. Once you gain access to Azure OpenAI, you can actually provision, customize, and tailor these AI experiences directly within your Azure subscription. And in those cases, yes, the data is more secure. It's in your own environment. The models are secured and trainable. But I think today, you're right, with them being publicly available out on the internet ether, you're right. I would not recommend it feeding that information, but stay tuned for what's coming with Azure OpenAI and the ability to kind of use these models directly within your own Azure interface, your own subscriptions, to really provide that peace of mind and privacy around these things.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Who else want to ask a question? You can quickly raise the hand. If you don't see anybody raise hand, you can go ahead to ask.
And I'll drop the example in for how to use Azure OpenAI. There's a really good Microsoft Learn course that talks about, using GPT-3 in your own OpenAI playground. Obviously, you have to fill out the form and request access in order to do this effectively in your own environment. So not fully available to everybody, but this is changing very, very quickly.
It's very exciting. Definitely, I will try to apply for OpenAI. Quick question, Chris. So you demonstrate this capability integrate with Sentinel, right? So integrate with playbook like logic apps. Are there something like you will see like more security solutions, for example, like a Defender or like a XDR or any other things will have this capability or embedded in those solutions?
I mean, it's hard for me to comment. I don't work for the AI team. I don't work in the product group or engineering team. I'm on the pre-sale side of the security, but I think it's a natural progression. I mean, when I was actually developing this demonstration and working through these things when this article dropped from Orca. So the fact that we're seeing third parties do exactly what I showcased in this demo in a much more controlled, deployed fashion, and our Microsoft's investment in OpenAI, it's seen it all over the media with Bing search coming. I mean, I really can't predict the future, but I absolutely see the value in how these things could be interjected into these operational response processes. So I have no doubt that some of these things in their current iteration may come into Microsoft's security platform overall. And the notion of AI is really not new. I mean, it's been around forever. Our Defender stack and Sentinel is backed by a ton of AI and machine learning already. It's just, I think the ChatGPT has got a lot of buzz in the media, but I do think that contextual chatbot type conversation, absolutely could play a role within security operations rather than just kind of on the back end doing its thing. I mean, I love the ability to just quickly ask a question in response to something that I'm dealing with. And obviously concerns with privacy there, but once we have it isolated and integrated and it knows about our information and data and past incidents, I think there's a really cool thing that we could do here. So who knows what the future will hold. I'm very promising about what's coming though, for sure.
Right. Yeah, very exciting because I get an impression while you demonstrate the whole process. I feel the ChatGPT looks like a virtual assistant in the security operations. I don't know which level that chat is. Maybe tier 2 or tier 3, kind of a SOC analyst level, or maybe some part is strong, some part is weak. But anyway, it's like you have another person, like another resource in your security operations center.
Let's keep in mind that this ChatGPT was never trained specifically on security operations. Could you imagine the power of taking like our DART team, our detection and response team, and all the amazing intelligence they know? Like I've actually been sitting on a call just before this around how to do incident response. And if we could take all of the advanced knowledge they have around, how to conduct investigations, what are the steps that need to be followed, and actually create an AI that is its sole specific purpose and task is to help guide incident response. I mean, it's astounding to think of where we could end up from a virtual analyst perspective in guiding best practices and principles around security operations and incident response. These are just trained on generic content that's out there. Once we start specializing them to do certain roles and tasks, the power really is limitless. I don't think it's going to replace our jobs anytime soon. Like, let's be honest here, right? I mean, I know everyone's fearful of that. I
Somehow
think
it's a little bit scary.
Yeah. But I think the ability to guide analysts through the investigation experience and take relative evidence and provide recommendations, I don't see it making decisions on our behalf anytime soon. But things change quickly. Who knows? Attackers will always be human, so there's always needs to be that human element from a defender perspective.
Excellent. All right, so people online, we have about 10 minutes to wrap up this session. This is a great discussion so far. If you have more questions, just fire up. Let take this chance to ask Chris. Okay, Khalid? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Chris, and hi, Brian. Thank you so much for the interesting session. I have a question regarding now, as everything, even the attack vector and everyone is becoming more sophisticated, and they are going to use the AI for sure to attack. And
Yes.
there are a lot of currently, like a lot of, I saw a lot of initiatives in regards to attacks, attack simulations, which are actually going through the AI, and it's doing the penetration testing and all of that stuff that we were using to do on black box and gray box through AI. So as with that said, how that will be working together, like an AI are gonna respond to an AI at the end, or how does that
Yeah.
you think it's gonna work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's already happening. Like a lot of our Defender stack is, backed on the principles of AI and machine learning. It's understanding contextually what's happening in the environment, where the alerts are coming from, who's doing what, and it has the ability to, at least today, alert on things that are occurring in the environment based on machine learning and AI, based on contextual evidence of what's happened prior to the alert being generated. And I think you're absolutely going to see, as I talked about, we have a new feature that's being incubated called automated attack disruption, where it will take action for you. It will disable an AD account. It will block an IP address. It will isolate a machine. It will undo a mailbox forwarding rule based on the contextual evidence leading up to that event. And in order for it to do that, there's no way that it could do that without artificial intelligence and machine learning to really determine from a near 100% that this is a true positive event that's occurring in the environment and we need you to take action. So I have no doubt that when attackers are dispatching, AI to attack, we will have AI on the defense analyzing these signals and generating responses. It's already happening. Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's interesting to be seeing that in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited for sure.
Yeah. You guys want to ask questions? We have about 7 minutes. And as we talk about a lot of things about this capability, one thing I switch the kind of gear, I think about how do we deal with the cyber talent development considering ChatGPT is coming, right? So it feels like a lot of skills previously we require people to memorize or like things. Now you just ask ChatGPT to provide the step-by-step. You just follow the step, validate the step. So what do you see the impact for talent development?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it can help assist in onboarding and training, right? The ability to, rather than me sift through 20 pages of Microsoft documentation, just give me the tactical information. We're already seeing these AIs being used to summarize massive articles into key critical points and those types of things. So I absolutely will see cases where, from a skilling perspective, the ability to surface only the relevant evidence rather than bombarding me with, pages and pages of documentation could potentially help from a skilling perspective. It's not going to replace analyst experience, like boots on the ground. We don't, that we talk about incident response frequently and thrusting tier 1 interns into the incident response process just because AI is telling them what to do is never a good idea, right? We need people who are experienced in these response plans. But, I think if we have a generalized idea of how to respond to an incident and we can have the AI guide an analyst through these steps, I think that's a really good way to sort of train analysts on the best practices of going through investigations. So not necessarily replacing the analysts themselves, but giving them, models that are trained in these best practices. I think I see some initiative there for sure.
Excellent. All right, so we have 5 more minutes. Any questions you want to ask? Take this chance.
Into improving their approach to cloud security. One of the key of the success of cloud control mechanism.
And I don't know if you observed, so if we have 2 different people to ask questions to ChatGPT, you may get a different results. So really depends on the quality of your questions. So if you ask the same thing, if you ask this way, or if Chris asked which he showed in the demo, you may get the totally different or like a better or worse response. So my question will be, what's your suggestion to ask better questions to ChatGPT?
I mean, there's lots of examples that are out there. I think you definitely need to sort of frame the ask as to give it contextual evidence. Like, I think one of the key things here is not just give me the specific steps, but as a security operations analyst, you're letting it know who you are, what your role is, and what you need to do in the particular scenario. You don't work for HR, you don't work for finance, you are a security operations analyst. So framing the questions in terms of the context is really, really key. And I think that's where the example that I shared specifically around, these types of things is I am pre-populating that prompt, right? I am pre-populating the contextual evidence that I know is critical to the question. So you can, when interacting from an API perspective, is, have that framework defined already. Like, have every question prepended with, you are a security analyst, and post-pend it. Like, you can append the response as well with things like include links to follow-up documentation. Like in this particular example, I didn't have it added, but you could say always start the question with, you are a security analyst, make sure you understand that, and append it with include this in the follow-up. So even if the person asking the question, isn't providing that context, it's hard coded into the API in terms of those asks. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think from a contextual point is let it know who you are, what your role is, and those types of things, and you'll find the answer and responses are far better. And I have obviously seen differences in the responses of GPT-3 and ChatGPT. Obviously, keep that in mind if you're playing with ChatGPT and then you hop in to play with the GPT-3 APIs. They will absolutely give different responses. I also think, as I talked about from a fine-tuning perspective, a lot of these APIs, it's in regard to this temperature parameter. Again, that's critical for making sure the AI produces consistent output based on the question asked. If two people ask the same question, we expect the same output. So playing with this temperature parameter can help reduce the randomness of the output, because especially when we're asking, like, give me step-by-step instructions for, looking at the vulnerabilities of a device using CrowdStrike, right? That should be the same answer every single time. So playing around with kind of that temperature parameter, making sure that you're hard coding a lot of the roles and specific responses into the asks, I think are also key when interacting with these APIs. I haven't played with temperature parameter all that much. I reduced it from like 0.9 to 0.8. I'm kind of curious if I bring it down to a 0 or a 0.1 and kind of see how that changes from a response perspective. It's a lot of fun to play around with, and it's and again, very low cost for you to play around with it. Like, anybody can get in, generate an OpenAI key, and start playing with this today at a very, very low cost. No idea what ChatGPT is going to cost in the future or other OpenAIs that are coming, from an API perspective, but GPT-3 is really good to kind of tweak and tune in order to get the exact responses you want.
Excellent. So this is a really insightful opinion from Chris about how to ask questions. And if I summarize, really is to be specific, right? So to really to provide more context. What do you want? It's like somebody asks, okay, how can I get a good job? Right. So if that's just the question, you maybe want to provide who you are, what's your strengths, what do you want to do, and what's your requirements, or what exactly you're looking for.
Yep.
Excellent. We do have I think we have 1 minute to go. I do see a question from I think from audience in the chat regarding the use case as scenarios. I think it's related to banking industry, financial institutions. When they apply the ChatGPT and they ask for some like a use case and also to understand maybe related risks.
Is there a question in there, or like?
Basically, it's a highlight. Basically, the question is highlight a high-level use case or scenarios a bank can use the ChatGPT.
Oh, I mean, that's a tough scenario. I'm not super familiar with the financial industry around those things, and I think definitely, be cautious around personally identifiable information, right? I mean, these are open AIs that are, on there. There's no, regulation in terms of where the data is stored and those types of things. So until we get these in our own environment, just be very cautious about submitting any sort of personally identifiable information.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so that's all
Great.
the time we have. Time is flying. We quickly finished 1 hour demo and presentation and questions. Again, thank you very much, Chris. Always enjoying your session and a lot of resource information. And we record this session. So if you subscribe to our Cyber Tech Risk YouTube channel, later you can review the session. I'm sure you will find a lot of useful information, or maybe can inspire you or trigger you to do some amazing things.